Welcome to a special edition of This Week in Missouri Politics at a special session of the Missouri General Assembly at the state capitol. We are joined by Senator Dan Hegeman from the great Northwest.
Yeah, I'm proud to be here, and I'm proud to represent the 15 rural counties of great Northwest part of the state.
I was going to be disappointed if you didn't call it the great Northwest part of the state.
I'm pretty pleased with our area up there.
Okay, so you are the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Yes.
You do the budgeting for the state Senate. So right now there's a thing called the FRA that most folks didn't ever talk about.
Yeah.
When you were here in your first stint as a House member, you voted for.
Yep.
Wasn't a big deal. What is the FRA? What does it do for folks? What does it do for my buddy Ben Appleknap up in Worth County?
Well, what the FRA is called the Federal Reimbursement Allowance, and what it does is basically fund our Medicaid program in the state of Missouri by a provider tax on hospitals, ambulances, nursing homes, and pharmacy services. And it brings in about $1.5 billion that are matched by the federal government, about $4 billion in total with all of that, and that's how we largely fund our Medicaid program in the state of Missouri.
So right now, if you have a proud Putnam County midget right up in Unionville, and they break their leg, if you don't pass this, is there going to be a hospital for that person to go to?
Well, we sure hope so.
But if you don't pass this,
no, the governor's announced a number of withholds that he plans on doing to try to fill that gap, which then impacts many other aspects of the budgeting process and many other entities that we budget for.
You know, sometimes you hear folks say, "Oh, this is the most important election of life. This is the most important bill," and usually it's not, just by definition.
No.
This might be the most important thing you do.
This is a very important piece of legislation that we really need to get done, and that's why we are in a special session, because we weren't able to get it accomplished during regular session.
So you've handled these bills. You moved one out of committee. Now, just so everybody knows, we're taping this Friday. To get it in the can. It's the actual bill will be perfected today, sometime, maybe tonight. You hope today, but maybe this evening, and maybe third read and passed tomorrow and sent to the House.
We certainly hope so. You bet. Yeah.
So there's language in
Dedicated to getting it done.
Sure. It looks to me like everybody in this building says we're getting this done. Not quite sure how you're going to get there. Right now, your bill that came out of committee has some language that deals with abortion. Can you give folks just the nutshell version of what you felt like needed to be in this bill?
Well, we have a provision that Senator Whelan offered during the regular session that deals with the use of abortifacients and trying to ban the state of Missouri from paying for abortifacients, drugs that are used to create abortions. So we've worked that language a little bit since Senator Whelan offered it in the regular session, but that's part of the bill. And then there's another provision that deals with the uninsured women's health initiative that is solely funded by the state government, by the state of Missouri. And we have a provision on that would allow, that would ban that from being utilized by abortion providers.
So I've heard folks explain, I heard you explain this on the Senate floor. There was a court ruling where you kind of eliminated some of the funding for things like Planned Parenthood in the budget. The court said you can't do that anymore.
Right.
So you got to find a different way to do that. And it's funny to me, I watch your campaigns.
Yeah.
I watch folks that run for office. They run for office. Almost every Republican runs on being staunchly pro-life.
Sure.
You pass out those little cards, right? I mean, I don't recall you having the most competitive elections, but when you did go around and speak, you said you're pro-life.
Well, I am.
Why would it surprise anybody that a group of folks run, all of them saying they're pro-life,
Right.
the citizens of Missouri elect a supermajority of those folks, then they're coming pro-life. It would be surprising if you weren't.
Right. Yeah.
But this is a unique situation. Now, I watched you sit through a committee hearing that I don't think there's anybody that would have traded places with you yesterday for about 2.5 hours. But there are folks that are on the pro-choice side that say there's a lot of actual provision in this that talk about birth control. Now, I would be surprised if anybody really was anti-birth control in the Republican caucus.
Right.
I don't pick that up, do you?
No, I don't either. And that's not what Senator Whelan's language says. It is specifically designed for abortifacients, drugs that cause, and for the purpose of causing abortions.
So when you get home and you go up to Tarkio and are visiting at Blakehurst,
You bet.
and someone says, I read where there was some birth control stuff, what would you tell him or a lady that stopped you there in Tarkio and said, is this true? What would you tell them you did here that made folks even concerned about abortion?
Yeah, and I would say that it does not deal with birth control. It does just deal with abortifacients and drugs that are used for that purpose. I think that's a characterization of Senator Whelan's amendment.
Let's say somebody does come next session and they do want to limit access to birth control. I asked Senator Moon when I interviewed him once, isn't there a monetary, a good fiscal policy for this state to take folks that if you're on Medicaid, you're not rich by definition.
Right.
Giving those folks birth control probably is actually a good fiscal policy for the state.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if a person isn't planning on having a kid and they probably can't afford one, having access to birth control is probably something good for everybody in that situation. Seems to me.
Certainly, a lot of folks would agree with that statement, and as do I.
I got a theory about some of these things. Some of these things you're doing, the first time you were elected here, the Republicans were the minority, right?
That's right. I served in the House in the minority the whole time, the 11 years I was there.
When you left the House, you could have wrote down some things you wanted to see the state do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you prepare to leave the Senate, almost all that list has either been done or tried, right?
That's right.
So you're running into some different things. Tell folks about the progress that's been made from the day you left the House till the day you're about to leave the Senate. The Republican Party has done so much of what they would want to do. The cupboard isn't bare, but it's close, right?
Well, I mean, certainly we protected the Second Amendment and the gun rights in the state of Missouri. Probably one of the strongest states in protecting those privileges and rights, not privileges, rights in the state of Missouri. Abortion services. When I was here in the House in the early 2000s, when I left the House, there were a lot of abortion providers in the state of Missouri. Practically today, we don't have any abortions going on in the state of Missouri, and most of the providers are not providing services anymore. So in my mind, that's a win as well. And I think tax policy. I think now that we're able to look at tax policy and try to keep it a low tax state. Missouri used to be in a low service, low tax state, and I think we still continue to be there. We need to take care of the infrastructure that we want to take care of, and certainly laud the governor in that effort and moving forward on infrastructure, on broadband expansion, on water resource expansion, on highway and roadway infrastructure. I mean, all great things, all in my mind, conservative values. This is the things that state government needs to be doing. And I'm happy that we are doing those type of services.
How's the state's economy doing?
State's economy is doing great. And I honestly give Governor Parson a lot of credit on that. He managed the state well through this COVID situation. Working with the local county governments and city governments to ramp up and ramp down their businesses and their restrictions as needed. He kept businesses going. I mean, so we've done very well in the state of Missouri, and I give a lot of the credit to Governor Parson.
I'm really lucky. I get to go to places like Putnam County one day, and then I'm in the city of St. Louis, and I'd have folks say, why won't Governor Parson just make St. Louis open up? And I'm like, he doesn't do stunts. That's not who he is.
Yeah.
You'd see other folks, why won't he force a shutdown? But I think Governor Parson, COVID was real. I mean, you're the first person I knew that had to struggle with COVID. It was a real thing. It impacted, people died from it.
Yeah.
But maybe you can't shut society down over it.
Right.
And I thought he played that very well of mixing
I do too.
Taking COVID seriously, but not taking it so seriously that you cripple the state.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you look at some of our neighbors, Illinois is crippled.
Well, you look at the East and West Coast where they just have crippled their economies, and then expect the federal government to bail them out. And so we did very well in the state of Missouri.
So tell me about rural broadband. I think it's it seems like every technological advance has drove folks to the cities.
You bet.
Rural broadband's the first real innovation that I think can allow people to go, if you want to live in Grant City and Worth County, it's hard to find a job. But if you have rural broadband, you can do all kinds of jobs right there, raise your family like you were raised.
You bet, and I think the COVID situation accentuated that even more and showed how important rural broadband really is. And so I have long been an advocate and supporter and a champion for rural broadband, getting it out there. We've got some great co-ops that are moving forward in that direction. Also, mutual telephone companies that have long ago made the investment in their infrastructure, brought fiber to the home, and allowed for rural broadband to their customers. God bless them, love them. We need to continue that effort, move it across the state so that people can come home to Savannah, Grant City, Princeton. Let's bring them all home. Grundy County and Trenton area, moving forward on it. It's great. That's the kind of infrastructure investments that we need to be making.
It is an amazing thing to think houses like mine that I grew up in that had a party line phone. I used to torment
I remember.
Miranda Humphrey up the street. Her
Yeah.
boyfriends would call, and you could
Yeah.
eavesdrop on the party line. That might have the broadband where you could do thousands of well-paying jobs on the same house that had that old party line back in the day. You know.
Yeah. So we're really looking forward. I've actually got some communities that are looking to try to bring people home, but access to broadband is imperative and very important in that process.
This special session, folks will be watching this on Sunday.
Yeah.
When they watch this, will their hospitals be safe? Will you pass this FRA?
I'm convinced we'll get an FRA done.
Maybe a winding path, but you'll get one done?
Yes, I'm convinced we will get it done.
Let me ask you this next question. If you did do an FRA without any of this other language, and session came back around, I have very seldom seen a serious pro-life initiative that wasn't adopted by the Missouri General Assembly. If they were to take this legislation and move it in a special session, it feels like if it's any kind of reasonable pro-life, it passes, right?
We'll see. I mean, yeah, you bet. And it's an effort. You know, the key on this is some folks are worried that it may violate, the federal standards or this federal Social Security code is some of the concerns. And then we don't gain anything.
Let me ask you a follow-up here, though.
Yeah.
Let's say you do something, the federal government says you can't do it.
Right.
My assumption is you, Cody Smith, Mike Parson get in a room, and you're right back here passing a clean FRA.
Well, we need to pass the FRA, and the fact in the past years they've never been conjoined.
I think
They've always been. We've always done a clean FRA, and this year it was decided by some senators that they would put the two together.
I think what folks maybe want to know is you may try some things, you may do some different stuff, but at the end of the day, you, Governor Parson, you're never going to let the FRA go away and hospitals close, right? You're going to protect that.
We need to do that, you bet.
Senator, I thank you so much for joining us. Hope you come back and join us as we lead up to next session and talk about maybe the great things happening in the economy.
You bet, that'd be great.
We'll be right back with our opinion maker panel. Senator Mike Moon will join us after this.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Your energy needs are changing. That's why at Ameren, Missouri, we're not waiting on the future. We're building it with the Smart Energy Plan, advancing thousands of projects across the state, helping reduce emissions through cleaner energy sources, boost reliability with self-healing equipment, and better withstand storms with new composite poles. Moving Missouri forward and bringing us all a little closer together. That's energy at work.
Welcome back to this week in Missouri Politics, our special edition this week for a special session here at the Missouri Capitol. We are joined by Mallory, Schwarz, and NARAL. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
And Kaitlyn Schallhorn, the editor of the Missouri Times, who usually puts these shows together, right?
Yes.
One less booking to make when you're the booking, correct?
It's nice. It's like a vacation.
It was the quickest confirmation you had for the show in a long time, I said.
It was, yes.
And the gentleman of the Missouri Senate, Senator Mike Moon. Senator, we heard what the FRA was in the last segment. It's important for hospitals. Folks need it in Lawrence County, Butler County, all over. Why is it this year it's actually this big controversial thing that's going into special session and there's a deadline of high noon? What is the issue this year?
Well, there are several. The potential of Medicaid expansion is one. And where's that money going to come from? The Hyde Amendment, which would prohibit the funding of abortion using federal dollars. The Biden administration is ignoring that amendment, so we need to perhaps intervene at the state level. And then the Missouri Supreme Court ruled that Planned Parenthood cannot be defunded using the budget.
So there was one other thing I noticed, and I did not, Senator Whelan, when he was on a few weeks ago, kind of outlining some of his issues with it, he said if you expand Medicaid, you have to accept the federal government's rules of family planning, which would include, I guess, some money for a lot of the things on his list. If you didn't expand Medicaid, you're right, you could maintain your own family planning. That's just something I didn't realize. Is that how you understand it?
I don't understand it that way necessarily. I believe in state sovereignty. I think that we need to tell the federal government where Missouri stands and what we think is best for Missourians. We need to fight for those issues.
Well, Schwarz, right now as it stands, the FRA passed every year. They call it a clean FRA. This year, it brings in a lot of the issues you work on every day. How real is it that a Hyde Amendment goes away? What are the impacts of some of these things on Missouri? The Supreme Court ruling, how you can't kind of use the budget for these things. What is the practical impact on those?
Scott, I think the real issue is that what Republican extremists in the legislature, like Senator Moon, are trying to do is prevent people who need Medicaid for their health coverage from getting access to birth control. Birth control is used by 99% of sexually active women of reproductive age, and they shouldn't be discriminated against because of their income level or other identities.
All right, Kaitlyn, there was a 2.5-hour hearing yesterday. There's all sorts of people testified. Actually, NARAL, Planned Parenthood, and Missouri Right to Life all testified on the same side of an issue, the first time for everything, right? They passed out the real bill, I guess, will be SB1 that'll be discussed today. What does the language say about birth control?
So SB1 is the bill that includes both the FRA reauthorization as well as the quote pro-life language. It includes a prohibition on abortion providers and their affiliates from being covered under this uninsured women's program, which, as was brought up yesterday and this week, Planned Parenthood already doesn't fall under that category. Now, when it comes to the birth control portion of it, there are certain drugs like Plan B or even IUDs that say they cannot fall under Medicaid coverage, quote, when inducing an abortion. Now, I think the question with that is what does that mean? What does when inducing an abortion mean? And it seems like there's some debate over that.
Senator Moon, it's a cultural issue in a lot of places. You know, the Catholic Church has some issues with birth control. I couldn't begin to tell you exactly what they are. That is not my field of expertise. But we're from Southern Missouri. I have never heard any teaching at church that I've been to that teaches against birth control. It would be my sense that most Republicans don't have a problem with birth control.
I would say that's probably true. And on the note of access, last time I looked and remembered, most pharmacies, including Walmart, carry birth control devices, and I don't know that anyone's prohibited from buying them. So, but why should the state have to provide it? Why should the Medicaid have to provide those items?
So,
If I could address that, you cannot get an intrauterine device or an implant at a Walgreens, at a pharmacy. There are 18 FDA-approved methods of contraception, and people deserve access to their choice of all of them. No one's access to a kind of medical service should be dictated by what's not available.
So using that analogy then, if I want a steak but I can only afford a hamburger, should I get the steak?
Do you think that a steak is equivalent to a basic reproductive health care that improves maternal health?
I'm just using that as an analogy.
You're being flippant
No, I'm
because
not
your
either.
goal is
Because birth control is birth control. And you can go to a Walgreens or any other pharmacy and purchase basic
Do you
birth
think
control.
that you can get a vasectomy at a Walgreens, Senator Moon?
Were we talking about that?
I can level for sure that that's not the case. Let me ask you this question though: the basic point of how many of these? I'm familiar that you have to have some medical procedures for some of these. Correct? It's not something you could buy. How much of that should the government be required to pay for?
Well, right now, when there are federal or state-funded health insurance programs, they cover the majority of health coverage, health care. And whether that's a choice of birth control or whether that's a vasectomy or wisdom teeth being removed, for the most part, they do not decide which care that you need. You and your provider decide that.
But when you do, there is a finite amount of Medicaid dollars, right? So every time you spend a Medicaid dollar somewhere, it means you don't have it to spend somewhere else. Is the state required to provide all these? I assume some of these things that actually require medical procedure are more costly than something you buy.
The state is actually required to provide federal Medicaid requirements state that people need free and not coerced access to the birth control method of their choice and need free choice of what provider they go to, which means providers at Planned Parenthood, and it means access to all of the methods of birth control.
Senator, is there not, though, a monetary argument for folks? I mean, it's not Scrooge McDuck diving into gold bullion because he qualified for Medicaid. is there not an argument that the state's better off fiscally to provide folks that maybe aren't affluent access to birth control?
Well, I think there is an argument that could be made from the fiscal aspect, but I think the fundamental argument is we all have the ability to choose. And if we choose to have sexual intercourse with another, the opposite sex, and there is a chance of pregnancy, there are ways to prevent that, and the government really doesn't have to be involved in that choice.
I'm with him a lot on the government ain't got to be involved in everything. You tell me, if you were in charge of this, where would you draw the lines of access to birth control? Where would that stop as far as Medicaid? Because again, everybody in your heart wants to say give everybody everything you can, but there is a legitimate issue of you can only cover so many people. So every time you give someone a Cadillac plan, somebody else can't get a Chevy. If you could write this, your own, imagine that, the NARAL person getting to write the Missouri statute. That had been a while since they've had built it, but tell me, where would you draw these lines?
So I think the lines are already there, and I think that Senator Moon just showed his hand to what this is really all about. This is about deciding who gets birth control or health coverage and who doesn't. And it's not about life, it's not about protecting life, it's about controlling people's sexual activity, and it's about using the right to life and bringing together his personal ideology and personal beliefs and implementing that on the rest of Missourians. What our laws say and what people should have access to in healthcare is the healthcare they need to live the best and healthiest lives they can, and to decide if, when, how, and with whom to start or grow their family so that they can live.
I think it was Dr. Ruth, and I think she would agree with your particular side. I believe it was she that said that we should begin thinking with our minds and not with our pelvis. So we can control our bodies and our urges, and we're not animals, so we need to do so.
Kaitlyn, we sit and watch these campaigns, right? And this is something that is, I chuckle sometimes to seeing some other journalists. Folks like Mike Moon do run on. He went to folks in southwest Missouri and talked about he was going to be a Christian conservative, which in southern Missouri means you're very pro-life. The public hears these arguments. They're for the vast majority of candidates, pro-life is one of the three things on their push card, and the voters overwhelmingly elect supermajorities of folks that are pro-life. It shouldn't be surprising when they come to Jeff City and do the exact thing they said they were going to do all campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that it's been interesting to watch the debate this week between even Republicans saying who is pro-life and who isn't pro-life enough. That seems to be kind of a question this week. But, I mean, it is a Republican supermajority. There are Republicans here. It shouldn't be surprising to see them doing something pro-life.
Now, Senator Moon, I don't reckon there's one person in southwest Missouri that is surprised you are pro-life, staunchly pro-life, and have values and ran on them and were elected overwhelmingly on them. But I don't think any Republican put birth control on their push piece. Abortion, yes. Birth control seems to be the place where this is taken. That I don't remember a supermajority of anybody getting elected saying they want to limit birth control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't either. It's just that when a life has begun at the point of conception or fertilization, that's where I draw the line.
Do you think there's an issue here? You have Protestants that are generally pro-birth control, and you have Catholics that are more reserved, especially the church, strict Catholics. I'm not sure members of the congregation follow that, but is there an issue of where life begins is actually we're breaking it down to the minute point of it almost becomes down to Protestant Catholic lines?
Perhaps so, and I'd have to look at their distinctions, so I'm not totally familiar either.
There was a doctor in committee that broke down this far more than I could understand. She lost me very early on. I'm sure the senators followed it much better than I did. But do you see where this is? I have never really thought, when you talked about NARAL, reproductive is in the title. It seems like it's hard in Missouri for you to compete when you're having to talk about abortion. When you talk about birth control, I think that seems to be the Republicans maybe going further than what their electoral mandate. I'm not sure you can get to the end of your electoral mandate on being pro-life. But on birth control, that's a different story.
I agree, and I think that Senator Moon's Republican colleagues felt the same. We had Senator Riddle saying that women need, use, and deserve access to birth control. We had Senator Searpoy saying that this is not a pro-life issue. We know that birth control prevents a pregnancy. It does not end it. And it's not the same as abortion. And so what Republicans are doing are conflating birth control and abortion for
Are the
political
opponents
gain.
of this legislation conflating the same things too, though? Is there not it seems to me like you have both sides, one wanting to do some birth control restrictions but not wanting to own it, and the other side wanting to make it that they're doing more than maybe they are. Is there a little politics at play maybe in this building?
I think there's absolutely politics at play, but it is based on a disagreement over what is your personal belief and what is scientific fact.
So, Senator Moon, there is a piece of legislation I've thought was quite clever. I remember when Jeff Sean filed it back in the House. You have a piece of legislation that would tax endowments for folks that, well, what would they tax endowments if they do?
Well, any university in Missouri that uses any of their funds, wherever they might come from, to train physicians to do abortion on demand, their endowment would be taxed at 1.9%.
And that would generate about, let's say hypothetically WashU, baby.
It could be, there's particularly, I think there's about $8.5 billion, if I remember correctly, about $150 million.
you pay for a lot of Medicaid with that.
That's a sizable sum.
Yeah. So bring it down. WashU would be the place where they do train doctors that could perform abortions.
Right.
And it's what it's pretty well aimed at. It has moved a little bit in the Senate, but I tend to think this is something you're going to come back to, if not in this special session, next year, correct?
I'll work toward it until we pass it, or until I leave.
Last question. When you look at folks, what would you say to folks, a candidate who is pro-choice, but probably can't win in Arnold being pro-choice? What do you say to those candidates? You'd want them to vote for Crystal Quaid, a pro-choice speaker, but they can't get elected. What is the messaging disconnect that with this issue and Missourians?
I think the disconnect is actually that there are a majority of Missourians who support access to reproductive health care without government interference. And it's not really about pro-choice or pro-life, and we get caught up in these ideological labels. It's actually about people want to be able to make personal decisions about their health care for themselves and their families.
Maybe talk more about birth control than abortion.
I think so, but I think we don't want to suggest, we know that people have abortions. We know that 7 in 10 support access to reproductive freedom and making that personal decision without Mr. Moon's opinion interjecting in their own healthcare and their own doctor's office, and people will connect to that issue.
What we do want Senator Moon's opinion on is who won the week. So Kaitlyn, who won the week?
I would say Senator Searpoy and Senator Williams. I've been in this building all week, and I've thought that their arguments are different and interesting, and so it's made this week a little bit more
Senator
fun.
Searpoy's on a bit of a roll, isn't he?
Yeah.
Who won the week?
Well, I'm going back a few weeks now, and that would be on the SAPA bill. I think Missouri won the week.
Who won the week?
I think that when Medicaid expansion is implemented this Thursday, which it will be, even if you haven't funded it, Missourians won the week.
I am going to say I think who won the week is Don Willey, retired after a lengthy career with the laborers, and while he does have to bear the burden of a cantankerous son-in-law, I look forward to seeing his retirement. I think you'll probably be able to see him at the lake a little bit more now often. We hope you'll win the week next week. Actually, not next week or the week after, but after 2 weeks off, we'll be back with This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.